All right, we'll go ahead and get started then. Good morning and welcome everyone to the first Implementation Committee meeting of the State Allocation Board for the 2012 year. I'm Bill Savage and I'm the Assistant Executive Officer for the State Allocation Board. I want to welcome everyone, and I see several new faces, and including a tag team from one of our state agencies. So I want to, maybe we'll start over with Fred and do introductions.
Representing Casville.
Bill's on.
Now? Try yours now.
Yes, release.
Check.
There we go.
Release.
The priority button was on. Start again.
Still Fred Yeager, Department of Education.
Lee Coop representing Casville.
Ian Johnson, Department of Finance.
Chris Ferguson, Department of Finance.
Mary Morris, American Institute of Architects.
Paul Hansen, representing the County Offices of Education.
Juan Morales, representing the Office of Public School Construction.
Richard Conrad with the Division of the State Architect.
Robert Pierce, representing Suburban Schools.
Dennis Dunstan, representing the Council of Educational Facility Planners.
Kathy Allen with Cash.
Lyle Smoot, Los Angeles Unified.
Cesar Diaz, State Building Trades Council.
Thanks, everyone, and welcome. And I want to make sure that everyone, if you come up and ask a question, and anybody on the panel, any of our people in the audience, please come up and use a mic because we are webcasting. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I assume that we will be done by lunch today and probably won't need to go into the afternoons fairly. I think we can get done in that time, although, you know, famous last words, I guess. But we'll try that. I would entertain any public comment, if there is any, on items that are not on the agenda. Hearing none, we'll move on and to the calendar. Our next meeting is scheduled for Friday, February 10th, 2012. And we hope to finalize SB 128 at that time. And I will note that there may be referrals from the State Allocation Board to the Implementation Committee for consideration in the future. So we're here today primarily to look at SB 128, Lowenthal, that was chaptered in 2011. And I want to turn it over to the Office of Public School Construction to give us a presentation on the proposed regulatory changes.
Thanks, Bill. I'm Jeremy McCarroll with the Office of Public School Construction.
Brian O'Dell, Office of Public School Construction.
So I guess we'll jump right into what did SB 128 do. It did a couple things. One thing, it added language to Education Code Section 17074.25 to allow school districts to use their modernization grants for high-performance components, including new renewable energy systems. Prop 1D had added similar language to the use of new construction grants statute. SB 128 adds the language to the modernization section. The other thing SB 128 did was it made career technical education facilities program projects eligible for the high performance incentive grant. Career tech projects had not been eligible for the HPI grant. Now they are. Now you'll notice, if you haven't already, our item today deals mainly with the use of mod section. Our idea was, despite both sections in the bill relating to high performance, these two sections are really quite different. They impact two different programs in very different ways, so maybe it would be best to have two very different conversations. So that leads us to the item and how we think the use of mod grant section can be implemented. The SFP section that lays out the use of mod grants is on the bottom of the first page of our item. And as you can see, the reg section includes a reference to the Education Code section that was amended by the bill. So since the new use of modernization grants are included in that Ed Code section, we really didn't feel that any change to the reg section was necessary. We are proposing, however, changes to the Program Reporting Requirement Regulation section, the Application for Funding Form SAB 5004, and the Project Information Worksheet. All the proposed changes relate to collecting data about new renewable energy systems. In order to best understand how these systems benefit districts, the proposed regulations would require districts that use their base grant for new renewable energy systems to submit basic energy systems information to the State Allocation Board via the PIW. The data collected could be used to track benefits gained for the public's knowledge, for policymakers, and to make any program improvements if necessary. Data collected will not be used for any kind of auditing purposes. The data we're interested in specifically is the size of the system in terms of the amount of energy that's generated, cost of the system, and the amount in dollars that are saved by the district as a result of the system. Now, we know we're adding to the PIW, but we'd like to note that districts that receive the HPI grant are currently required to report the amount of energy savings on the PIW already. The proposed amendment would add that requirement if the project includes these systems, regardless of whether or not they're getting the HPI grant. Additionally, we hope the proposed request is not seen as too burdensome to districts, as we believe they'll have gathered this information already and making up their own minds whether or not these systems are right for them. Now, we know SB 128 allows districts to use mod grants for other characteristics excuse me, of high-performance schools, and we're considering data collection methods for those other systems, but at this time we felt it best to move forward with the changes you see here today. And with that, we'd welcome your comments.
Jeremy, could you walk us through the proposed changes on the 5004 and the project information worksheet that are starting on page 3?
Certainly. The change to the 5004 specifically would be one question. Is there a new renewable energy system being installed for this project? The object of that largely is to make sure that when we get information on the PIW, we're matching up the right project to the right information, so that we get a PIW that doesn't include information. We want to make sure that, no, there really isn't any systems in that project. And then on the PIW itself, we would be adding a new section called the Renewable Energy Information section that, again, is not related specifically to the HPI grant, but to high-performance components generally. And we would ask for the total amount, actual or estimated if the total isn't available, of the kilowatts generated, the cost of the system in dollars, and the cost savings in dollars.
I think just as a comment, what we're looking for today from our stakeholder groups is input on whether we're asking the right questions in terms of those items, and obviously input on anything else, but specifically I think we're interested in making sure that if we're collecting data on renewable energy systems, are we asking the right questions with those 3 questions? But obviously, any other feedback too. Dennis.
Yes, on page 4 with the instructions to the PIW, down where you have the underlined sections, it says that the renewable energy information section must be completed at every reporting interval, or period, I'm sorry. Generally speaking, these systems, you figure out during the design phase what the estimated savings is going to be, and that doesn't change throughout the project. It won't change until you actually get the project going after the final PIW is submitted. So is there really a necessity to report that with at every reporting period, or just perhaps the first, and if there's any changes?
That's something we can consider.
Is there a way that we would know, besides just not reporting it? I mean, how do we know that it hasn't changed?
Well, Well, you could leave a comment in there on the PIW that says if it hasn't changed, then you don't need to fill anything out. If it has changed, then what are the changes?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as long as we...
Because typically, unless they change the design of the project, I mean, it's not going to change until, the information is not going to change until you actually get data on how it's performing.
Yeah, I think as long as we know, we can use the same information.
So the initial report is probably the most important one, and if you have a system that's installed, and some of the experts out there can help me, it does have degradation over time, fairly small amount, but by the time you get to the end of a project, presumably the information that we're asking for isn't going to change very much from what it was at the very beginning, right? In terms of...
Well, there's not going to be any degradation.
Right. It's not enough time. Well, by the time it's completed and operational at the end of a reporting period for the project, it could be easily.
Yeah.
Yes,
but you're not going to be...
But so, I guess I'm agreeing with you that the initial filing is probably the most important one. Okay. Kathy?
Actually, I have several questions, because and let me start with a comment. Maybe it's just because I'm still giddy because it's the new year, but I can't help but comment on, Jeremy, your statement. I just got a poke fun. I'm sorry. You said we don't consider it to be any additional burden because we're already doing it for the HPI. Because the PIW, as we all know, is not burdensome at all. So anyway, I just kind of wrote that down because I thought that was cute. So my first question is, can I, in looking at this, can I consider the definition of a renewable energy system to equal what is in, on the first page, B, roughly speaking? Page IMP 01, under B, where it says a mod portion may also be used for the cost of designs, materials that promote the use of energy. Is that kind of what we're calling the definition of a renewable energy system?
That a renewable energy system is one element of what's included in B.
Okay, well, let me give you a scenario, because I'm not sure how this works. And I have not had the fortune of being able to participate in the HPI program. I have a high school with a gym that has no air conditioning. So this summer I'm going to install 2 big HVAC units on this gym. It's a big concrete building, so I need to add insulation because otherwise I'm wasting energy. So I'm going to be installing HVAC units. I'm also going to be installing an insulation product on the exterior of the building. So in theory, at the end of the day, I'm actually going to be using more energy. But I'm installing energy efficient things. So I'm not quite sure how to, well, it's not really renewable. No.
It's not renewable.
So that wouldn't qualify.
No.
I think on page 5 we list some of what we think are the typical definitions of renewable energy, such as photovoltaic, solar, wind, geothermal, and then we have the other. If there's other definitions out there that we could use, please let us know. But those are the basic ones that I think we understand to be renewable energy.
And we did actually wrestle with this question of whether we needed to create a definition for a renewable energy system. So it's a good question, actually. So any further comments from the committee?
I just wanted to say, in line with the getting the information at the beginning of the project, that makes a lot of sense to the County Office of Education. I'm not sure if you're getting the information that you want. You do have it on an annual basis. That's good. But usually we know right off the bat the system size, and we also know the years of payback. And if the information could be limited to those 2 items, you'd get that right up front, and you wouldn't have to ask the question again.
And I think again, if it doesn't change, then that's fine. It doesn't change as long as we are able to know that. And the district would have to tell us. You can include the same number, or you can say it doesn't change, whatever is easiest. I think for us, if you just include what the number is, it makes it easy for us to know. But we wouldn't know unless a district tells us on the PIW.
Ryan?
The way the PIW online form works is district goes in, fills out the first PIW. Then when they go in to submit the second one, everything is auto-populated. So that information would still be there. You would just go in and either say submit, nothing's changed, or you would go in and make the changes.
And am I correct that we are proposing that not just districts that use a modernization grant, which is essentially what we're dealing with under SB 128, we're proposing that all districts that install renewable energy systems using state bond funds would provide a report on them using this mechanism. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So whether it's new or whatever program it is. Yep. Right.
For modernization, does the renewable system have to be on the site for where the school is? That'll bond, is that, or can?
To qualify for mod funding, it has to be, the mod work has to be on the site that generated the eligibility. There's few exemptions to that, but that's the general case.
Solar farm on because high school might have a farm separate and apart from the campus, but that's where I would have installed a solar farm that could have then provided renewable energy. Still considered a school site, but it's not on the site that would generate the eligibility. Connected to, sort of.
Would that generally service just the site or the whole district? I'm not sure how those systems work.
Today it might be the district, tomorrow it could be the site,
Right.
or vice versa, who knows. But I think that's a good question, because I think, that's a very good question.
That is. That's something we'll have to take a look at.
Well, go ahead.
I guess is the key point on this whether the energy produced by the system is used on the site that's getting the grant, or is it used district-wide?
Well, I think for modernization, it's to improve the useful life of the school. Modernization, as you all know, you'd like to take a look at the buildings on that site to take a look at whether they're old, whether they qualify, and the idea is that you get money to improve them. Now, the bill allows not just typical improvements to classrooms, but also these other high-performance attributes, presumably on the site, because that is the site that generated the eligibility for modernization. But it's something that actually I don't know that we had contemplated that we'll have to take a look at in terms of if it's servicing that school site but not on that location, whether it's an eligible use of mod funds. We'll have to take a look at that.
One of the variations that I've heard about that I understand that DSA is even considering is that districts could potentially put photovoltaic systems on fenced-off areas of the sites of an existing school site and not have to seek DSA approval for those installations. So would an installation by that in that nature that is using modernization funds, would that be covered, Mr. Morales? Anyway, there's a lot of variations out there.
No, that is a good question. We have heard about those type of systems not requiring DSA approval if they're fenced off. Again, another one that we'll have to take a look at. We try to think of all possible scenarios, guys, but this is why we appreciate the input. Yes.
Lee?
Like Kathy, I haven't had the great luck to have a HP grant yet, but maybe I can get an answer to this first and then follow through. An HP grant, you don't just have to have renewable energy on there. It's also energy efficient systems. So Kathy's question about an energy efficient system, she can't qualify for an HP grant for that in that example?
Yes, she could.
So, but we're only collecting the information on the renewable.
Well,
that's what we're talking about.
That's correct. Districts that use modernization funds, so you guys help me out when I misspeak. Districts that use modernization funds now and get an HPI grant with the MON funds already have to fill out the PIW. Isn't that correct? In the energy efficiency section. Correct.
Okay, so it's already being collected, but this is just the addition just for the renewable
That's
piece.
for renewable energy. Right.
Okay. So, yeah, I just wanted to clarify what Kathy was saying, because it made it sound like she could not, might not even be eligible for HPI under that scenario. She is. She just wouldn't report it in this section.
I think the qualifications to qualify, I mean, the criteria to qualify for the HPI is a little different. Then maybe Brian can give us just a summary of what that generally takes to qualify.
For mod projects, the minimum amount of points to qualify for an HPI grant is 20. The maximum number of points you could get strictly on renewable energy, I think, would be 15, if I remember correctly, and that's if the system is grid neutral, so which is highly unlikely. So, yeah, it would need to be part of a larger high-performance type of project with, you know, it could be many different things how you achieve those points. Solar would be part of it. You could have water efficiency, all sorts of different things that are available as credits in the regulations. For a project to qualify strictly on renewable energy, I think it's safe to say would be not possible, the way the regulations are set up.
And just, thank you, Brian. One of the handouts that was at the door is the regulation sections from the SFP regs that include 1859.71.6, which is new construction, high performance, and also the modernization section, 59.77.4. That will give you an idea of how for the members of the committee that aren't familiar with this, the pages indicate the various areas, how many points you get for complying, for providing each of the different types of high-performance elements in a project. But, yes, did you have a comment?
Well, maybe I misunderstood a comment that was made earlier, but for the reporting on the renewable energy, you don't have to be getting HPI grants, correct?
That's correct.
So this could be just a part of the base grant, and you still have to report the renewable energy.
That's correct. And to Kathy's point, as far as the scenario goes, the HVAC and anything else you're doing on the system could very well qualify you for the HPI grant, but if none of it is renewable, you wouldn't have to fill out this new section we're talking about.
That's right. And Mr. Pierce.
Thank you. I took Kathy's question as to mean, would her improving the building envelope through insulating the building qualify as a renewable energy source? So that answer is clearly no. It does still fall under B, which is the expanded definition of what you can use modernization eligibility for. And at the same time, HPI is a whole different calculation to determine whether you are or not eligible for HPI funding. So it would qualify for the new definition of modernization, regardless of the HVAC load she is adding. But anyways, you brought up a good point, Bill, about on-site solar that's fenced off, no students or staff are allowed. I know there's a big push from the manufacturers and the designers of those systems, given the state superintendent's goal and DSA's goal of becoming more grid neutral. So that would be really interesting if we could have a way that DSA could write us and or OPSC a letter around not needing DSA approval, but that the district had submitted, and because this is a renewable energy source project, it meets certain requirements to not need DSA approval but still qualify for funding under this. That would be a big help, and I think would promote districts to be able to do projects like this, because in our case, some of the reasons it doesn't pencil out are because of the costs associated with needing DSA approval and certification and inspection and all those types of things. So that would be big.
That's a really good point, actually, in terms of the interface between DSA and OPSC on these type of projects. If we're really going to incentivize them, we want to make sure we cover things like that.
Yeah, and that's something we'll work with DSA. Again, just an initial concern is whether the system is for the school and not the whole district-wide, and whether use of mod funds should cover the entire...
I'm assuming a site-based solar or wind system that feeds that site. Right now, off-site doesn't work in SMUD's region. I don't know about others, but...
One of the things I do want to clarify was some of the discussion about your HVAC system, your wall insulation, all of that stuff all of those elements were already fundable. We're already being funded using modernization grants. It really, the only area that OPSC's interpretation of the regulations did not allow for funding was in new renewable energy systems installed using modernization funds. Is that correct, Juan?
That's correct. And going back to Rob's point, in the past, just say solar panels did not qualify for mod in terms of the use of grants. But now if a school district has solar panels, they may not necessarily qualify for high performance incentive grants, but that is an eligible use of grants, and that is basically what the bill does. It allows these types of things to now be eligible for modernization, regardless of whether it generates HPI or not. So if you don't generate enough points for an HPI grant, the solar panel itself is an eligible use of mod funds.
Has OPSC seen districts make applications for solely a renewable energy system proposed under modernization grants?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted, yes, Fred.
So the solar panels on this school, and then during the summer, the solar energy would go to the benefit, not to the school, but to somewhere. Is that? Right.
It goes back into the grid.
To the benefit of not the school, perhaps.
To the benefit of all of us in the state of California by avoided generation. How about that?
But part of if it's restricted to the school use, whether that needs to be clarified, that excess can be done whatever.
Sure.
I think my comment was just more for, the whole district's schools versus just one.
Right.
Teresa Townsend is here from the Division of State Architect. I'd like to ask her to come up, and maybe she could make a couple of comments and help us, just to finish our discussion.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Is this on? Okay, good. I think the paragraph B is going to be a great transition from when we leave off from HPI grant, which is an addition to the base grant for modernizations, and then encouraging people to do high performance. So that's great. A couple of things I listened to in the questions around the room is a definition for renewables. I would recommend that we use the definition out of CHIPS criteria, since that's what we use for high performance. And I have it here with me if you'd like. It's EE 2.1, and it goes to include solar electric systems, photovoltaics, solar thermal systems, domestic water and space heating, sun chillers, wind turbines, non-polluting biomass systems, and geothermal sources, which includes geothermal hot water, geo-exchange, and water loops. Now, you probably don't know what all those are, and you'd have to Google them, I'm sure. But I would like to put a plug-in for solar thermal, which is very useful for heating water and has been known to save up to 70% of the natural gas costs. So that might be, I mentioned that might want to be one of the others. But if, as a definition, I think that would be useful.
Quick question. Is that an all-inclusive list? So if something else is not listed there, it doesn't qualify?
Well, I was looking also at the green code, and it includes solar, wind, geothermal, low-impact hydro, which is not on the list, and biomass, which I believe is fuel cells, which you may or may not want to go with. Do you want me to, do you want a copy of this? Okay.
Are fuel cells considered renewable?
We want to clarify that?
Yes, they are. The other thing is the question on the DSA exempt projects. Robert, I was going to comment on that. We do have an IR out, and it's posted on our website, and it's IR 16-8, and it addresses the exempt projects, and there is a system in place at this time to go forward with that. So that's exciting.
Could you summarize that IR in layman's terms for us?
Let's see if I have it here. Just quickly,
I don't know. I can go through the titles. Would that be helpful? There's a little bit of background on it and what it has to do with photovoltaics and solar thermal systems, panels, and BOS equipment, which is balance of system. The solar project components that are subject to a DSA review, and then it goes into then the structural safety requirements, and it also discusses all the ballast, the wind design, seismic design, et cetera. And then the fire, life safety, and electrical requirements are in here as well. And then the solar project submittal requirements, which I think would be valuable to the question that came up about how we go ahead and take care of the exempt projects. And I think it's real simple. You're going to fill out a form and then say it's exempt, so we get some information. We are exploring how we're going to collect some information if we can, but the PIW is going to be great information as well that the state can use on solar. And lastly, it's a solar project's not subject to DSA review and approval, so it goes into that more detail. So.
Can I clarify? So there is a section that speaks to certain certain things allowing it to be exempt? So, okay, that's great.
Yes, and it was, as most people are talking about, it's fenced in. There's no access for teachers and students, so it's not like a teaching lab, and that has to do with accessibility. And also it's ground mounted, so it's just equipment basically.
Is that relatively new? Is that a recent
Yes, it was put out on the 6th of January.
Yeah, that's real new.
Very recent.
Very great.
And there's a website up on DSA's talking about all the solar stuff, but it points you basically to the IR. But it's trying to encourage solar to go forward. The only thing that I'd like to, somebody mentioned net metering, asked about solar, what happens in the summertime, and I believe there's a setup with the utilities that is wheeled or net metered. I'm not an expert at this, but they receive credits for what they produce, and then they can reuse them within a year's time. So that's not going to be a problem for the schools, I don't believe, depending on their utilities. So you should check with them how they handle that. And the great question on on-site, off-site, I think there was something that has to be explored. And then I circled also, something we didn't discuss is monitoring. When a company comes in and does a PPA, power purchase agreement, they own the system, they monitor it. It's to their advantage to do so because they don't want the system not to be producing. And there's several times when the system's just not producing and they don't know it. If they don't have a management system, an energy management system going along with the photovoltaics, it's not going to be as valuable of a system. And I've seen 2 situations where I've asked for information like, oh, it's not working, we've got to plug it in, something's not plugged in or whatever. Cleaning of it's
system, monitoring system that goes with them, whether they're under a PPA or not. So a district that purchases a system directly would typically have a web-based monitoring system as part of it, and so it would be included in the overall cost of the system. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say it would be an eligible cost because it would be included in the construction cost and the overall contract cost to install the system. The other component that's really part of the fun part of it is that most of the systems now, every one that I know of, includes an educational kiosk, right? So you have in the library, in the lobby of the high school, so then you look at your real-time generation and you have a number of charts that you can bring up from the monitoring system on real time.
Yeah, and that's considered a teaching tool, which is wonderful. I think one of the perks. Yeah. So that might be something you might want to consider, too.
Teresa, how many projects that you look at under the HPI program have renewable energy systems in them? What percent approximately? Do you have an idea on that?
5%, and they're only allowed on new construction, so we don't check for mods at this time.
Interesting.
How many do you think mods have come in?
We have rejected them. We'll say about another 5%.
So about 5% overall.
Okay.
I'm sure it's going to grow.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I want to just step back and maybe have a little further discussion on the issue that's been brought up about site generating, let's say it's solar, but providing onto multiple sites. And I think it's conceivable in the not too distant future that that's going to be something that's kind of the norm. Now, let's assume that what's before the PUC doesn't go through and we don't, they don't tack on that delivery charge. But it is conceivable that a large site, and I'm going to go back to my Western Placer days, I have a 500-acre farm. I could put a huge solar array out there and potentially, not today, but maybe a few years from now, generate a lot of power that could go to multiple school sites. So, and I'm not asking that we address it and fix it here, but I do think that it's something that we should keep in the back of our heads, because I think that that's going to be something that we're going to see as we go down the road. That because an elementary school site is not going to potentially have enough land or rooftop or whatever to generate more than its own needs, but a high school site, for example, with especially a big high school site, might be able to generate for its site and maybe an adjoining middle school or something. So maybe it becomes a prorated share, but just something I think we need to keep in the back of our minds as we as technology expands and the PUC rules in favor of us.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's something that we definitely need to take a look at.
And I think it'll be valuable for high-density school districts that are building in high-density areas.
Just as a practical matter, I think that the cost of most systems is quite high in comparison to the grants that you'll get from a modernization grant under the state program. I think we're going to find over time that the system costs are up here and the grant levels that we're talking about for modernization are down here. Now, would a district come in and for a school site, instead of modernizing the classrooms, opt to install a photovoltaic system that used all of their grants? I guess they could do that under this, but I think all of us as people involved in policy in California, we always encourage districts to do energy efficiency work first on their schools prior to installing renewable energy systems, so that, and energy efficiency work is typically a fundamental component of modernizing a school building. New insulation, double pane windows, high efficiency HVAC systems, new lighting, etc. And we, as a state, and the superintendent of public instruction, his school's Vision of the Future report was very clear that renewable energy systems should come after you perform basic energy efficiency work on the site, so that you're not pumping, new solar generated electricity into a site that's highly inefficient. So I think that's an important piece for us to remember here. Yes? Not efficient.
Well, sitting next to Kathy, she talks fast. Now, I just wanted to agree with what you just said, that you can, in fact, have a standalone PV project, and that's the only thing you're doing through your modernization dollars. I agree with all the things you said there, Bill, that you should do this, you should do that first, but I just want to make sure that there is no issue around filing a standalone PV or other renewable energy kind of project.
No, it's an eligible use of modernization funds. It's no different than currently, even before SB 128, a school district that has old buildings and generates modernization eligibility can decide to use the grants, not necessarily on the old buildings. That's a local level decision. It's no different for this new photovoltaic system. There's going to be, the district has to have old buildings to qualify, and if a school district decides that I want to use those grants instead of the buildings that generate the grants on a new photovoltaic system or on a newer building, that is a local level decision.
Thank you. Is there any further comment from the audience? Thanks, Teresa.
I just wanted to make a comment on Kathy's comment. Aggregation is, if it's not in your area right now, it's probably coming. So that allows for you to generate energy at one site and have the credit go against your other sites. So that is an important, that should be an important consideration, if not today, for the future.
Can I just to follow up on that, because I don't know a lot about these systems, and I was curious of the committee, would that system, and I'm assuming that it would it generally be more expensive or not if it provides energy just for a school site or for the rest of the school sites? Is it the same system can handle one site or multiple ones, or is it more expensive? I'm just curious.
If you did it to the scheme that I know we would like to see it done in Elk Grove, it would be much less expensive, because rather than doing multiple solar sites, just from an efficiencies perspective, you would have one massive site and all the support hardware that goes with it. You're buying one time as opposed to multiple times.
But it'd be more expensive than if you just have a system for that one site.
Well, what I would envision is, say we had 10 sites that were eligible for modernization funding and we were doing projects. We could combine those 10 sites into one site in terms of funding.
Yeah, I think the cost per watt would go down dramatically by the economies of scale.
And you're not losing valuable school site space that many of us, once you use it, it's gone. So it would be using cheaper dirt off-site.
Okay, Anna?
Ana Ferreira, representing the School Energy Coalition. I would very much say that our organization is appreciative of the work that Senator Lowenthal and his staff have done on this bill. We very much appreciate it. I would also echo the comments of Member Pierce, discussion at DSA, and also with the Chair's efficiency comments. Efficiency first is what we tell our members. As to the amendments here, I would only say, going to Ms. Townsend's comment on 05, page 05, where it says, please indicate the type of renewable energy system installed. Photovoltaic is drilling down a bit on solar, and so in order for those to be kind of germane, you'd probably want to say solar that would incorporate thermal and photovoltaic into that piece there. And that would be my only comment. Very much appreciate it.
Maybe I need to understand. So solar hot water systems are extremely, a solar hot water system that provides heated water for a boiler system or a pool, it's going to have, it's completely different than a photovoltaic electric generating system. I actually disagree with your comment. I think that we need to use the term photovoltaic because, first of all, it's the most widely installed system right now. I mean, we may want to put a separate thing, expand other, or add one more box for a different type of solar hot water system, if that's the case. But I actually think photovoltaic is the correct term to use, but I mean, I don't know, toss it around. Mr. Orr's here from CHIPS too, but anyway, we can, yeah.
I think I would agree with you, Bill, because technically speaking, daylighting is a type of solar. However, and it is a renewable energy source, but I don't think it would qualify under what we're talking about today. So, there's all different kinds of solar. I think you need to get a little bit more specific on the type of solar.
I guess I was, I thought that would be included under the bill, that all of those types of solar projects would be considered under HP and therefore could be considered under this.
Well, yeah, we're agreeing that they would be considered.
You're saying...
I'm just saying that the definition of renewable energy, I think given the overwhelming type of systems that installed are photovoltaic electrical generating systems, that we probably need to collect that data. In fact, the way that the data in terms of its size and system size, et cetera, is laid out, it's really structured towards that, towards a photovoltaic electric generating system.
I guess I would say that if you're looking at the the categories the way that you have them here, that geothermal and also wind would not determine where that power was going or for what use. It would be, I guess I don't see that this is equal, that they're similar in the way that they're being applied.
Okay.
So, if you want to separate categories out like that, I just don't really see how geothermal or wind either then would
they
apply.
both, those are both systems, and maybe that's where, so all of the systems that are identified here, with the exception of other, are, in my understanding, are systems that are the first two are generating electricity, correct? And the geothermal system is generating heated water or chilled water? All right, let's have the experts come up.
It's also electricity.
No, not usually. Can we ask Mr. Orr here to come up from CHIPS, and he can help us with this?
Good morning. I'm Bill Orr, the Executive Director of the Collaborative for High Performance Schools. And I would actually second using the definition that CHIPS uses that Teresa mentioned earlier. I think basically on the solar hot water issue, that's basically what I would use. On the ground source heat pumps and other geothermal sources, you're going to have some situations where you're actually getting heated water. In other cases, you're just taking advantage of the Earth's natural temperature to heat or cool water, and so it's a very passive system, but all of those should have eligibility for use under the modernization grant. So I would second the use of the CHIPS definition for renewable energy sources. And so I do have a couple of other points, but on that one, that's what I would suggest.
I would only say for the purposes of this piece, I don't know how I feel about the definition of CHIPS, how our members would feel about that. To me, it seems a little, without looking at it, it's hard to imagine they would encompass every piece, but I would imagine that also CHIPS does their homework very well. So I think we're in agreement that that would mean, though, that solar would be the better definition if you're using it this way.
Okay. Thank you.
So maybe I'll just stay up here. Obviously, we've mostly been talking about substance. I think that there are a couple of good points, but I think there's also a process question. And while I haven't redone the calculations this month, the last time I looked at it, there was about $450 million left in modernization funding, and there's about $66 or $60+ million still available in high performance incentive funding. And by the report that OPSC did in November, they were estimating that the modernization funding could be exhausted as early as August. And so just from a process perspective, it would be my recommendation that whatever we do can't be viewed as a barrier to getting in those modernization projects to take advantage of this change, and can't be an additional disincentive for applying for high-performance incentive grants. So CHIPS believes that this change is largely implementable by operation of law, that the interpretation regarding the use for renewable energy was a matter of policy, and that with SB 128, statutory intent has been provided. It is clear that you can, in fact, use it for those purposes. So while you may want to go through a regulatory exercise, it would be my recommendation that you not wait for it, and that the stakeholders not have to wait to submit their projects to take advantage of this new provision that went into effect already. So, whether we're trying to look at it for the future, if it takes 6 months to do a rulemaking package and the money's already gone by the time the rulemaking is finished, I'm not sure what we've done. So I think we need to send a really strong message that SB 128 is in effect, that projects can incorporate renewable energy as part of their modernization funding, And I would also like to reaffirm the message that Bill made, and also Anna reinforced that, really send that efficiency message. So in addition to the substance, I think what we're talking about is great. Having some additional information about the performance of those systems is also important, but I think we need to send a really clear and strong message that you can do it now and that you don't have to wait for a rulemaking process to be completed.
Yes, Mr. Dunstan.
That brings up a question. Had the staff intended to submit these regulation modifications as on emergency?
We were always going to try to submit an emergency. Not sure if it'll meet the criteria, but to the extent that we can, we do try to submit them all so we get them quickly adopted.
Okay. Lyle?
I guess we were looking at this from the perspective that you're not making regulation change to the application of the new benefit to the project. The only change you're making here is to the PIW. So it would seem to me that these benefits were actually available as of January 1st, following that logic. So I think that's a great point you made. It would be bad policy, if you will, to not do everything you could to let these benefits take effect, as of January 1st, and then let the PIW fall into place wherever it comes.
Those are good points, something that we'll definitely take a look at.
Yeah, I think it's, so the statute went into effect on January 1st.
Correct.
And so what is there, have you had a similar process or situation like this where statute is affirmatively changed what was
just in the CHIPS world, and I think with regulations that I've been involved in my former life as a state regulator, when a new statute goes into effect, unless basically regulations are intended to implement statute, and so to the extent that it's clear on the surface of things, that law becomes law immediately. In some cases, a statute might call for the development of regulations to further clarify things, but I think this was a fairly narrowly construed passage, and I think it provides the legislative intent that people were looking for. So additional things like the reporting, that's additional clarification and could go through a rulemaking process, but just from the standpoint of the statute, I think it's clear on its face what it means.
Yeah, I think, to the extent that the statute, that the law is clear and executable, regulations may not be necessary. On some cases it is. But again, these are all good points that we'll definitely take into consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Brian?
Quick thought, if we just look at the first paragraph on the top of page 2, it addresses that very issue that we're talking about.
So, Bill, who determines whether regulations are needed or not? Juan said you're going to take a look at whether you need regulations.
Yeah, it'll be part of our item. Again, we'll take a look to make sure that, our proposal doesn't change the regulation in terms of use of grants, because we reference that Ed Code section, and because that section is modified, there's no need. So, again, something we'll take a look at to see if it even needs to be, if it could be implemented at the beginning of the year. That's really the question. But in terms of, from the staff's perspective, we'll take a look at that and recommend something to the board.
Ms. Garrity, did you want to make a comment? Go ahead.
I think Juan just, that it seems to me that you say that we don't need, it's already incorporated in the regulation, so
yep.
I support January 1st. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so very effective committee work. We came all the way around, and we've agreed that the statute is effective already, and everybody. anyway, so we'll get some determination on that, on where we want to go, and whether or not we need to provide some kind of written clarification or talk to the board or about this.
Yeah, just in terms of next steps, we are not taking this to the January board. We do plan on taking it then to the February board, and at that point, we'll have our proposal whether we need to wait for the regulatory process or not.
Great. So we're going to shift gears now, assuming there's no other comments on the first part of this, and take just a brief pass at the other part of the bill, which relates to high-performance grants for career tech educational facility projects. So, Jeremy?
Sure. Well, in the item am I on? In the item, we really just wanted to lay out some of the challenges we were having in implementing the inclusion of the HPI grant to the Career Tech Education Facilities Program. Aside from there not being a lot of money in CTE, first of all, the Career Tech program is based on project costs. The HPI grant, as we've implemented it, is based on a percentage of new construction and modernization base grants. So it doesn't translate exactly in the first place. Also, there are already, I forget the exact number, but there is a CTE funding round that is currently open. There are applications in-house that have been approved, but that there's no funding for. So to implement this HPI grant, we would need to essentially kick those approved projects out and reapprove them. And what else was there? CTE projects can also consist only of equipment, which or furniture, which again might not translate to the HPI grant as we've implemented it. And also, career tech projects might be so small in scope that just generating the HPI points might be a challenge for districts as well. Those are I guess that summarizes some of the challenges we're having with these two programs.
So what you're trying to say is OPSC is not bringing forward any proposed regulations to implement this portion of the legislation yet.
Not at this time.
For all the reasons you just said.
Yes.
There's no money left, and we're challenged by how to do it. The point of our discussion today is that hopefully the best minds of our high-performance world and career tech world are still here, and they can help us look at what's a possible framework for implementing this under the career tech program, in melding high-performance program with career tech education program. So we want to get some suggestions from the committee and from the stakeholder groups regarding how we might structure this. Jeremy, did you have something else?
Just one other thing, that as long the SB 128 also provides that for high-performance incentive grants that a project could go beyond the current CTE cap, that's $3 million per project for new construction or $1.5 million for mod. But it's worth noting that high-performance components are eligible expenses right now under CTE. They wouldn't necessarily achieve the incentive grant, and they couldn't go over the cap, but they could be a part of projects right now.
Okay. So, question? Do you have a question or a comment?
Yes. In the item it says, as of December 14th, 2011, 1.4 million bond authority remain in the CTEFP. Is that a net figure with a list of unfundeds sitting there waiting for funding?
No. That would be, the unfundeds would make that number go into the black. I forget the number exactly, but
Okay, so you're saying there's only $1.4 million left in the CTE program. Don't worry about whether there's unfundeds against that or not. That's just all there is left. So that's all you're talking about right now is a $1.4 million fund.
Exactly.
Period.
Exactly.
So
we better clarify that.
Yeah, and just, again, a little bit of background. May of last year, we had about $29 million remaining in bond authority for the CTE program. So we took an item to the board asking for direction on how to allocate the authority. Because the prior round, the third round, which was, I believe, in October of 2010, was oversubscribed by about $135 million. So the question was, board, do you want to go down that list and fund the rest of those projects, the $135 million, I think it was 97 applications, or whether the board wanted to declare that round closed and open up a new round and allocate the money accordingly. The board decided that they wanted to go down the list because those projects had already gone through the Department of Education review. They were ready to be approved. And they also decided to keep that round open should future authority become available. So the $1.4 million that's available in authority, that will go towards the list of those projects that are part of the third round.
So there is a third round list of projects, but they've already qualified under current regulations, and we presumably wouldn't go back.
Correct.
With a new statute that added some new requirements.
Qualified or have been apportioned?
They haven't been apportioned. They were those are the projects that didn't have enough authority. So they were processed, but we didn't allocate any authority because we ran out. So they're on a list, if you will, awaiting any additional authority if it becomes available. And these, I think, were 2010. Is that correct, Julius? In the third round, October 2010. So they came in 2010, and they are on a list waiting additional authority.
So basically, the things that are being asked here and the options to resolve these issues is against $1.4 million right now. There's no unfunded list, there's no unapportioned list. That's all that's left in the program. So it would be basically looking at a potential new bonding program coming in and including a CTE and a program that would be applicable to these regulations.
Yeah, unless the board takes a different direction right now, the third round is open. There's $100 million in that list, and including the 1.4 of authority, is going to go towards those projects. So these changes, again, unless the board changes direction, would apply towards another round if the board opens up another round and there's additional authority.
So is there an anticipation that there will be additional funds coming in from some source without any bond measure?
It's the typical rescissions. Money come back to projects that have rescinded. That's how we came up with the $29 million last year, was projects that rescinded. So those types. There's also a loan component, CTE, that we may not see a whole lot of money and maybe not for some time.
Right.
But I think those are the two things that I would expect in terms of authority coming back to the program, rescissions and loan payments.
So, assumedly, there could be another $29 million. I don't know if that's possible or not at this point, but there could be 29 plus a million, so there could be $30 million worth of projects that might come in. That's 10 new construction projects or 20 mod projects, whatever.
Right.
So it probably does behoove us to try to get something going as quickly as possible so that any new project that might be funded would be eligible for this money. Is that?
Well, let me clarify that, though. That new money that comes back in, the $29 million, right now is committed to the third round of projects. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry.
So, okay, assuming we get another $29 million, $30 million from rescissions or loan payments, right now, that money, that authority, is going to go towards the third round of projects list, not new ones. Again, based on the board's action to keep it open and go down the list, the authority that comes back in now are going to go towards the third round projects.
And those third round projects do not include any of this because they were already filed.
Correct. That's correct.
Is there a way to go back and let those projects have, access to this if those districts, those project administrators wanted to go after it?
We'd have to take a look at it. What we're talking about is including additional grants for projects before the law was implemented, before the law was chaptered, I should say.
Well, I understand, all of the complex issues that are circling around the wagons there, but those are projects that maybe were filed a long time ago, but they haven't been funded yet. They're sitting there. I don't know if you'd call that an unfunded list at this point, since it's technically beyond the bond authority, but
Not funded list.
it's a not funded list. I mean, I realize there are complex issues, involved in that statement, and there are program issues involved in that statement, but it just seems to me like, to the extent possible, these issues ought to be addressed as soon as possible, and we ought to address the potential of those projects coming back in for some kind of additional funding under this program, because this renewable energy program is an enormously important issue for a lot of districts.
Yeah.
Well, and this is not just renewable energy related. This is any elements of a high-performance grant related to a career tech project. Okay, so who wants, Lee?
I just wanted to make sure it was not an unfunded apportionment. They're just on a list in some sort of...
Yeah, we did, yes.
And that almost, to me, means that they should be able to do what Lyle's suggesting, just in that it's not an apportionment.
Right. I mean, one of the things we take a look at is they submit an application at a time, given a certain set of regulations and laws in effect at that time. So can we use that application and apply a new law that became effective this year without resubmitting? Some of the things we have to take a look at.
I have a question.
I understand that does create a whole landslide of other issues. I understand that. How old is the oldest one? Would you know that off the top of your head?
They came in sometime in 2010.
Okay, so they're not crazy old.
Yeah, I think, was it before 2010, Julius?
It was in 2010.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate the 4 points here as challenges, and I would just echo Lyle's comment about, and I guess Juan saying, unless the board changes its direction, could we as a group say, yes, we would like you to change your direction, and allow these ones that are sitting on a list to come back in for an amendment on their application, whatever way that can happen. That would be one question. But I do agree, like the first bullet's probably the one that would need to be worked out, and I'm wondering if staff has looked at that at all, as how you could do it rather than presenting an obstacle to it. Is there any way we've looked at, I agree that it's CTE's percent, or it's based on project costs where you've got percentage. So some way to, and if that change causes all kinds of crazy regulatory things, then it's going to be a disincentive. The other 2 points would be, I think, just district problems. Some CTE projects won't be eligible for HPI, so okay, they're equipment only. That's fine. That's not a challenge. That's a challenge for a district, and we just say, well, we're not eligible. That particular CTE project, okay, we're not going to apply for it. And the second thing about size is the same thing. Okay, so this project's small, we can't get HPI. Okay, it still doesn't stop the program from going forward and for trying to figure out, because not everybody's going to be eligible. So I think that maybe that first one from a staff level is the most important, and I'm just kind of curious if you guys have thought of trying to figure out how to do a calculation.
We've had the greatest minds in the ziggurat on this.
That's right.
No,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just want to clarify the first point, Lee. Whether the idea, the request is for, okay, we have a third round, right? They came in and applied in the third round. So is the proposal to have the board declare that round closed and open up a new round and applying now? Or what? I'm trying to understand what...
I don't know how it will work, Juan. That would be, again, up to the greatest minds in the ziggurat, and you guys can figure that out. I'm just saying, intent-wise, echoing what Lyle's saying, the intent and what the implementation committee would be saying is that we don't want it to be an obstacle. We want as many districts as possible to be able to take advantage of this very important program. And now the law is in effect.
Yeah.
So is there any way to see how it could be made possible instead of seeing what the obstacles are? Not that you do that.
Sure, we can certainly look at that. And a couple of, I mean, if you have a list of projects that was approved in 2010, I mean, I would assume there's some that probably aren't viable any longer. So there's probably a lot of issues related to relooking at the list. Not that they're not surmountable issues, but I did want to make sure everybody is aware that at the back of one of the handouts there are 2 pages or so, or 2 or 3 pages of typical career tech projects, and this is apropos this is just from Region 3 and one group from Region 4, so you get an idea of an urban area and you get an idea of an agricultural or valley area, types of projects, sizes of projects, and how that plays into overall considerations of trying to put together, it's almost like you'd have to do a custom, so in answer to your question, have we thought about different ways you could do this? Yes, we have, and one possibility is to put together, I guess, a customized scale. Although if you look at some of these projects, a $7.1 million South Lake Tahoe Arts and Media Entertainment Center could presumably qualify for the 20-point minimum under HPI. Maybe it already has. And why don't you come on up, Teresa. The other thought that I think we had in considering a framework for this was, as I think everybody is aware under the high performance program, the most recent regulation changes included an incentive, what's the word I'm searching for, bonus? An incentive to the base grant of $150,000 for new construction projects and $250,000 for modernization projects that relates to funding, consultant costs, commissioning, etc. One possibility for doing this for CTE would be to put an appropriately scaled, comparable bump into the law, into the regulation that would be structured for CTE grants that would allow districts then to be able to get commissioning and other services that are part of high-performance schools as part of a CTE grant. So, and staff may have some others that we've thought of too. Just like, no? Okay. Go ahead.
Just one quick thought. As far as size, that does make sense that, if a project just doesn't generate enough points, and it wouldn't. But that gets back to the customizable or the customized point scale, where because these projects are so small, we didn't think using the existing scale, few of them would ever even be able to generate enough points. So that gets back to why you might need something custom for CTI, for the other projects for that specific program. Because part of the idea of the grant is to change behavior, not just additional funds, but to change behavior and really have something that incentivizes where people go, oh, I would like to do this and like to add these things in. Just having some additional funds, may be good for the project, but may not necessarily make any cause anyone to make any changes as far as what the project would look like. If that makes any sense.
Extra funds always make us change what the projects look like. We do change, of course we change our behavior and apply differently. If there's funds available and it is to the local community interest and district interest, yes.
Right. I didn't say that clearly. For example, earlier we were talking about energy savings, right? So HVAC and things like that, they would already be eligible expenses under the program. So what could we do that above and beyond things that people are already doing that make sense, that are eligible for the project, what would be additional to incentivize them is something that we would hope to be accomplished as part of that, along with the other challenges. We're not saying that we can't overcome these, but this is why we can't just change the existing point to say, and CTE. It would be more than that, is what we're trying to say.
I'm not sure if this is a follow-on to your comment, but Lydia Barone is with us today, and she just took out her score sheet and did a quick little calculations for CT, which we don't have any coming in, right? Because it's not allowed. Right. She said we've done a couple. So she looked at it and said that a well-designed CT building could achieve up to 20 points under efficiency for 4, low-emitting materials for 4, EQ 3.0. What's that? It's an acoustical prerequisite for 2 points, and then site for 4 points, HVAC for 2, and water and IAQ for 4. So that would add up to about 20. And I don't mean to contradict, but this is, it might be an anomaly that there are some. I also do have been in contact with a fellow in a firm, and he was so excited that this was coming about. And I think he missed the mark because he's already gone in for apportionment, but he has a CT project with one of the major firms in Sacramento, Roseville area.
Great. Can I, just before that, I do want to recognize Lydia Barone is in the audience from DSA, who does all of the high-performance work for DSA in terms of reviewing projects and really coordinates the department and is extremely knowledgeable, so I really appreciate all your work on the program.
She said thank you. She is great.
I have a process question since they have you up there, Teresa. If we were to consider the third round of projects, $100 million, to allow them to qualify for HPI, those projects, they would still have to go back and get a review through your office, right? DSA still has to review those, so they would have to go back to DSA to be reviewed to see if they qualify before we can fund them.
That's correct. Don't you think so? They'd have to go through our scorecard. Per the Ed Code, it says that DSA has to verify any HPI points before it can go to be funded.
Okay. And then this is actually for Brian, process question. We cannot accept, or we don't accept applications that include HPI grants unless they've already been approved through DSA. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, I was looking at this information, and I don't know if this is a complete list of all of the first and second round.
No, it's not.
Okay.
An example.
Looking at this, something clicked, and I remembered that there are loans in the CTE program, and so I don't know, since this isn't a complete list, I don't know how much money might be coming back from loans and what the time frame is for that, but I'm assuming that between that and rescissions, because time has gone by, et cetera, there could be some money coming back into this program in a reasonably quick. So I think it's important that we resolve these issues and try to figure out some way to, make a recommendation. So, Bill, I was wondering maybe you wouldn't want to put together a little subcommittee of experts in this field and sit down at a separate meeting, just a little 5 or 6 people meeting, and come up with ideas on how to resolve these. I'm sitting here looking at these and I'm thinking, yeah, okay, I can think of a couple of ways that may or may not work, but I could think of a couple of ways, so maybe that would be a good way to resolve this and get back to here at the next meeting with a recommendation.
Thank you. Good idea. I want to open it up to additional comments from the audience also.
Bill Orr with the Collaborative for High Performance Schools. I'm not as familiar with career tech projects as I am with the modernizations and new construction. I have looked at it a little bit, and we actually do have some CHIPS verified projects that are performing arts centers or are culinary academies. The two things that strike me is that when we revised the regulations that went into effect a little bit over a year ago, I think the most important thing for CHIPS, and I know that's something that we work very closely with CASH and other organizations on as well, was that base incentive grant. And I would agree with the assessment that Lydia just shared, that we're looking at probably projects that are going to nominally meet the minimum score for HPI. So my recommendation would be to look at career tech projects very similar as how we looked at the modernization projects, and focus exclusively on what that base incentive grant for a project would look like, and not so much how much do you get for additional points beyond the minimum, because I don't think you're going to see 41-point career tech projects. So I think, picking the number, obviously the $250,000 was a number we came up with for modernization projects. If you look at the last time I did the numbers, we're looking at $3 to $6 million projects on average for modernization projects, not HPI modernization projects. But, picking a number, I think, is really the only question, and I don't think it's unreasonable to look at them like modernization projects. The other thing is just in terms of scoping the project, in the back of the California CHIPS criteria, there's a matrix that looks at how the CHIPS criteria applies based on the scope of the project, and for the most part, I think these buildings would be looking like new buildings on existing campuses. So I think in addition to the back of the envelope point count that was just mentioned, which seems reasonable to me, that I think would be helpful in terms of identifying what projects might qualify for an HPI or a CHIPS project. So my recommendation, stick with the base incentive grant, picking a figure that is reasonable for the scope of those projects.
So it's sort of a keep it simple?
That was exactly it, yeah. So we're looking for definitely a KISS approach here.
Good, thank you. Any other comments from the members of the audience? Oh, I'm sorry, Paul?
When we talk about keep it simple, for county schools, the career tech is a little bit of a sensitive issue because of the whole comprehensive high school approach. But certainly it's in our best interest that if there are spare cookie jars around or funds coming in, that new construction and modernization would be our first choice for that money, to stretch those funding sources as much as possible.
Okay. Great. So, hearing no further comments on this, so part of our discussion today was meant to elicit what was the level of interest in getting the second half of this, the CTE portion, in place. I heard, and I guess, so I'm just trying to summarize here. So what I heard was that there is interest in considering whether the non-funded round, not the unfunded list, but whether that there is interest in going forward to at least put together something. And I think one of the best ideas I heard was maybe we put together a small working group of people, informally DSA, OPSC, and CHIPS, and we look at what would be a simple approach to putting together the CTE portion. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Sure, a curveball question?
I noticed in the governor's budget proposal, it includes a section on moving modernization dollars to new construction pot of money. And I'm getting a bewildered look from, maybe I misrepresented that, but there is a section on moving pots of money so as to avoid the level 3 fee. And I just wanted to, I didn't know, was it just ORG money?
Right, it's just ORG.
No CTE money?
No CTE money, no other programs, no modernization. At this time, the proposal is just ORG funding.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so that's why I brought two guys from finance today. So.
Another guy from LA come on.
All right, so next up on our agenda, thank you, gentlemen, is we want to have Mr. Morales give us an update on AB 436, implementation and where we are with the filings, et cetera.
We're still going through the approval process for the regulations to get through. They are still en route. We hope to get them approved soon. So in the meantime, we are doing some workshops, some trainings. Our next pre-SAB meeting that is on January 25th. We're going to have a workshop. We're going to be partnering with DIR to provide school districts just sort of a training on the new changes to get folks informed. And we're also updating our publications, too, to provide information. Is that correct, Brian? So the regulations are still en route, and we are providing a workshop January 25th. Hope they will have the regulations approved soon.
Good, thank you. And also, CASH has a workshop series on 8436. There was one in Sacramento earlier this week, and there's one in Ontario on the 18th, including DIR and attorneys in the field. And it was the one that I attended on Tuesday to present at was quite good, actually, and really got very deep into some of the issues related to labor compliance programs in school districts as we go forward. So, hearing no other comments, Mr. Smoot.
Well, you knew I had to make some comment. So I just want to clarify something that has been boiling in the back of my head for some time. This LCP program, you're having workshops, and those workshops are talking about the regulations that will be approved. But are you holding districts to performing according to those regulations at this point in time?
In what sense?
Well, in terms of there are forms and things that had to be filled out that are part of the regulation package that hasn't been approved yet, but as I understand it, you're going to require those forms to be used regardless.
Well, there's several requirements aside from our regulations that districts have to comply with, right? Namely contacting DIR and having perhaps the exemptions. So that is the main part. You still have to meet that if you're awarding contracts after January 1st, and then you have to, for the projects that received an apportionment and now are submitting a fund release, we are asking for verification from DIR that districts have contacted them. So that is
which isn't part of the new regulation package.
The requirement to contact DIR is part of the law.
No, I understand. But the requirement to include that on your documentation that you're submitting to OPSC is part of the regulation package that hasn't been approved yet.
Right.
And I guess my question is a general question. Is this a signal that the board is going to start, and this is relevant to today's conversation, to start using new forms before the regulation is passed? And I'm thinking in terms of this package here, if that is the board's new methodology, that they're going to use forms, at least, maybe more than that, that haven't really been approved through the regulation package yet, that might be a factor in how soon you can implement these changes from 128.
What are we asking for, Brian, for those projects?
We're asking for a copy of the PWC 100, which is a notice to DIR that they've initiated that process. The purpose of that is because the law says that districts have to do that. If they haven't initiated that process and we don't find out, and for example, for the entire project, and we don't find out about it until time of audit, it makes that apportionment invalid. So what we're trying to do is just make sure that districts have started that process so that they can actually keep the funds, because if they request the funds and say, look, we just signed the contract, we're ready to go, and they miss that step or they're not aware of it, it's not maybe something they can do retroactively. So we just want to make sure that they comply with that, with the existing statute and the DIR regs, to make sure they qualify for the grant.
But we're not
I
asking
wasn't trying to reopen, take the Band-Aid off that old wound. That wasn't where I was trying to go with this.
I guess I was just asking if we're asking districts to submit the form that hasn't been approved by OAL yet, and the answer is no. We're not asking districts to submit that form. I thought that was that your question, Lyle?
The form, you're asking districts to submit a, what is it, 5005, is that where it is?
Yep, the fund release.
That includes new requirements.
No, we're asking to submit the form that's in effect now. No.
But how do you know about the, what is it, POS form?
Well, we're asking for that to verify the district's...
What methodology are you using to ask for that form?
I don't know.
Where is that request included?
Is that part of the...
Isn't it on the 5005?
It's included on the 5005 that's going through the regulatory process. The current 5005 doesn't state that, but when a district submits it, we contact the district and ask for it.
And I guess if I could step into this one. Let's remember that the labor code changes from AB 4 related to AB 436 are in effect already. Districts have to comply with the notification requirements and have to use the CMU. The outstanding issue, to my mind, is really if you don't comply with that, it creates risk for the school district in the future, and it creates a situation where you wouldn't be eligible to receive potentially any of the funding for the labor compliance program to go to DIR. That's the issue.
I'm not trying to get back into that discussion, Bill.
Okay.
That's yesterday's news, as far as I'm concerned. My only reason for bringing it up is that there's a change to, was it 5004 here? Is it 5005 in the 128? 5004, I think, whatever, it doesn't matter. And my only point was, in terms of holding things up or being worried about something getting held up, I think we've already resolved the basic premise that the benefits are probably eligible right now because you don't have to change the regulation that deals with the code section. I'm just wondering if the board has adopted a procedure that requires the inclusion of a form that hasn't quite been approved yet before, is that a change in the process? So now you can just say, okay, this form, as soon as it's approved by the board, is available. And I'm just saying it's a simplification. That's where I'm trying to go with this, is that maybe you can simplify new forms that come into being in this kind of a circumstance so that you don't have those issues about this part's approved and that part isn't. That's all.
Yeah, no, the board
didn't care about the LCP issue. That's yesterday's news.
All right. The board didn't approve procedure to allow districts to submit a form that is not has not been approved by OAL yet. That wasn't part of the item. So that was one of the questions you asked, whether the board no, the board did not.
So you're accomplishing that objective by just calling the district and asking them rather than using a form that hasn't been...
Correct. The districts are submitting the form that's effective right now, which doesn't include the changes, and then we're asking for, informally asking for the verification that they did contact DIR.
And we do use some forms that are not approved by the board, as you know, in the program, in order to assist districts in the application process. Checklists and forms of various types. All right. Thanks, everybody. And our next meeting is February, and we'll see you then, February 10th. Thanks.